It was just before 10:30 on a Monday night in late January in Wisconsin. It's cold. It's that Wisconsin cold that really gets underneath your coat and touches you so that you can't get warm. Frank Almond has just finished a performance at the Wisconsin Lutheran College. He's done this hundreds of times. He walks out the back door of the concert hall the way he always does, and he's heading to his car. Along with him, he's carrying his violin. But it's not just any violin. In its case is a 1750 Stradivarius made by the hand of Antonio Stradivari himself over 300 years ago and valued at somewhere around $5 million. Frank has been playing it on loan since 2008. He knows what he's carrying. He keeps it in a specially made case and he never lets it out of his sight. As he crosses the parking lot, he notices a van, and then a man approaches. Almond later described what happened next in a way that's kind of funny. He calls it Scooby-Doo level. There's a van that's backed into the parking space next to his car. A man walks around it. He's difficult to see in the dark, but at the last second, Almond catches a flash of little blinking lights. Then he's on the ground, hit with the taser, and within seconds, the violin is gone, grabbed by the man who runs back to the van and disappears into the Milwaukee night. For the next 9 days, one of the most valuable instruments in the world has simply vanished. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do one of those cases that starts out sounding like a classic art heist, sophisticated, premeditated, maybe even something international, but then turns out to be something that's actually a little bit stranger and in some ways more interesting than that, because whoever planned this robbery had done a lot of research. They'd done surveillance, and they even had compiled a scrapbook about the violin and about Almond himself. And yet, when it was all over, the FBI agent who cracked the case described the scheme as anything but sophisticated. So what actually happened, and why does it still stick in my mind many, many years later? Let's get into this. This is Scareful Stories, and if you're new here, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe, and I'd appreciate it even more if you like the video, give it a like, and leave a comment. All of that really helps to get the video shown to more people and helps the channel grow, so thank you. To understand why this violin matters and why stealing it was, as one investigator put it, both a serious crime and a deeply impractical idea, you need to know a little bit more about what a Stradivarius actually is. Antonio Stradivari lived in Italy in the late 17th and 18th centuries. Between roughly 1666 and his death in 1737, he made over 1,000 instruments, including violins, violas, cellos, and harps. Of those, somewhere between 600 and 650 violins are thought to still exist today. And for reasons that are not entirely settled among experts, the wood, the varnish, the geometry, the sheer accumulation of time, these instruments that he made are widely regarded as producing a sound that hasn't been matched in the 3 centuries since. They're also worth an extraordinary amount of money, with some selling for tens of millions of dollars, which naturally makes them attractive to certain kinds of people who have no intention of playing them. The violin at the center of this story is known as the Lipinski Stradivarius. It was made in 1715, which means that when this theft happens in 2014, it was approaching its 300th birthday. Its previous owners included an Italian violinist who had composed a famous sonata, and Karol Lipinski, a Polish virtuoso whose name it eventually took on. Frank Almond once described it as being like a novel, so many famous people and figures connected to it across the centuries. It passed through various hands across Europe before eventually, through a chain of inheritance and care, it landed in, of all places, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was being held by an anonymous private owner who loaned it to Frank Almond, who was the concertmaster of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. And they loaned it to him so that the violin could actually be played rather than just sitting in a bank vault somewhere. How Almond came to play it is its own small story worth telling. One day he received a short 1-paragraph email, which apparently he says musicians get a few times a year, saying something like, We have this instrument, it's part of an estate, and we're looking for advice on it. His instinct was healthy skepticism. Someone finds a violin at a garage sale, or it's been in the family for decades with the Stradivari label inside, and 99 times out of 100, it turns out to be nothing. This time, a dealer went with him to the bank vault where the instrument was being held and determined that it was real, and he has been playing it since 2008. This violin isn't just a collectible now, it's a working instrument that is actively in use and part of a living musical tradition. And when it was stolen, that means people really felt that. So now back to the parking lot. When the Milwaukee Police Department arrived at the scene, they found Frank shaken but not seriously hurt. A short distance away, officers discovered the violin's case discarded by the side of the road. Whoever took the violin had apparently transferred it out of the case rather quickly. That was an early clue about their thinking, or their lack of it. The Milwaukee Police Department moved fast. They contacted the FBI, whose art crime team was brought in to assist. There was a $100,000 anonymous reward put up almost immediately for information leading to the violin's safe return. And there was an immediate concern that went beyond the financial. The Lipinski is a delicate, centuries-old instrument. A Milwaukee January is brutally cold, and fluctuations in temperature and humidity can cause catastrophic damage to a violin of that age. Every day it was missing added to the risk that it might be permanently harmed. One of my big concerns was how the violin was being stored. FBI Special Agent Dave Bass later said, "It was a race against the weather as much as anything else." Within days, investigators caught their first break. It came not from an informant or surveillance footage, but from the taser itself. Tasers, as it turns out, and I had no idea, release a small burst of confetti-like tags when they're fired, and each tag is printed with a serial number which links back to the weapon. The tags were collected at the scene, traced to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer had records which led to the person who had purchased that particular taser. His name was, and yes, this is really his name, Universal Knowledge Allah. What kind of a name is Universal Knowledge Allah? Was a Milwaukee barber. And I want to pause just here for a second because it's this moment in the story when you start to realize that the level of planning and the level of execution don't quite align. When Universal Allah was interviewed, he told investigators that he had purchased the taser around 7 months earlier at the request of a man named Salah Salahdin, because Salah, who had a criminal record, wasn't able to buy one himself. Universal had a permit for concealed carry, but Salah did not. Universal told investigators that on the evening after the robbery, Salah had told him he had gotten the instrument. Police also received a separate tip about Salah, and when they looked into him, they found out something very telling. A search of his apartment didn't immediately turn up the violin, but it did turn up a scrapbook full of articles and photographs about the Lipinski Stradivarius. So this was not just a crime of opportunity. But wait, it gets so much better. Salah was 42 years old and lived in Milwaukee. By accounts of people who met him during and after the investigation, he was intelligent, articulate, personable, genuinely engaging. Journalist Buzz Bissinger, who wrote about the case for Vanity Fair, described meeting him and said he was clearly a smart person who had, in his own words, gotten on the wrong track. That track included, and here's where it's just like, wait, what? Included a prior conviction. Back in the year 2000, Salah had pleaded guilty to receiving stolen property. Specifically, he had tried to sell a stolen $25,000 sculpture back to the gallery that it had been stolen from. The sculpture had been stolen in 1995. Salah had reportedly not stolen the sculpture himself, but had been involved in the plot to steal it and later tried to profit from it years after the fact. This just goes to show that he had experience, albeit maybe small, and a failed experience with stolen art. He had a scrapbook about the specific violin, and he had conducted surveillance on Frank Almond. Investigators later confirmed that he knew where Almond lived, knew his routines, knew his schedule. He had recruited somebody to help buy the taser, and he had a getaway vehicle. A woman named Pleasant Hope Sharif drove the van that night, and he had a plan. The plan, according to FBI Special Agent Bass, almost certainly was not to sell the violin. Bass was direct in stating that there are only a handful of people in the entire world capable of moving a Stradivarius of this profile, and Sala was not connected to any of them. The violin is simply too famous, too distinctive, and too thoroughly cataloged to ever appear in any legitimate or semi-legitimate market. You can't fence a Stradivarius the way you could perhaps fence jewelry or even a lesser-known painting. What Bass believes is that the whole scheme was designed around the reward money. Steal the violin, hold it for a little bit, then arrange for it to surface through a tip and collect the $100,000. It's a roundabout scheme, but one that at least had a certain internal logic to it if you don't think about it too hard. Sala himself, in his sentencing, gave a different explanation. He said he had wanted to buy boarded up properties in Milwaukee, rehabilitate them, and create jobs. Kind of a Robin Hood framing. He needed money to do all this good work, and the only way he could think to get the money was to steal this violin. The judge was not persuaded, however, and when you really start to think about that scrapbook that he had all about the Stradivarius, this wasn't something that he was like, oh, I need money, I want to go do these good deeds, and let's just quick come up with a way to do that. He had studied this for a really long time. This was a crime that he spent quite a long time planning, and that he had convinced himself was more sophisticated than it really was. I mean, maybe he was really trying to do some good works, but I have a feeling that he just wanted the money for himself. But maybe I'm wrong, who knows? Alla, Universal, and Sala were arrested within a week of the robbery, but the violin was still missing. Investigators spent hours with Sala. He was evasive, apparently contradicted himself repeatedly, and at various points seemed to be enjoying all of the attention he was getting. He was telling stories about himself as a serious art thief who operated at a very high level. 9 days after the robbery, he finally broke. He led investigators to a home on East Smith Street in the Bayview neighborhood of Milwaukee. The FBI's art crime team agent Dave Bass climbed through a crawl space into the attic with a borrowed ladder from the SWAT team. And there, inside an old suitcase, wrapped in a baby blanket, were the Lipinski Stradivarius and its 2 very valuable bows. The violin was in excellent condition. 300 years old, it had survived wars and revolutions, and now had survived a Milwaukee winter stuffed in an attic. Maybe that baby blanket really kept it warm. Frank Almond later described getting the violin back in terms that didn't need much embellishment. It survived wars and revolution, and most recently someone trying to steal it. When a journalist asked him whether his insurance costs went up after the theft, Almond said no. In fact, the instrument's value went up by about $1 million, which is maybe the most crazy footnote in this entire story. Someone tried to hold a 300-year-old Italian masterpiece hostage in a Milwaukee attic for 9 days, and the result was that it became worth even more money. The homeowner, for what it's worth, apparently had no idea what was in the suitcase in his attic. He was an acquaintance of Sala's who had no part in the theft. In May of 2014, Universal Knowledge Allah pleaded guilty to felony robbery for his role in providing the taser, and he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. In November of that same year, Sala pleaded guilty to robbery and was sentenced to 7 years, with an additional 5 years of extended supervision to follow. At his sentencing, the judge described it as a vicious and unprovoked attack that could have ended a career permanently or destroyed one of the world's irreplaceable artistic treasures. And 1 year after the theft, almost to the day, Almond played the Lipinski at the Wisconsin Lutheran College again. The same stage, the same violin. Members of the Milwaukee Police Department and the FBI were in the audience. It was the instrument's 300th birthday celebration. There's a layer to the story that I keep coming back to, and it has less to do with this individual crime itself and more with what the crime reveals about how we think about rare and very beautiful things. The Lipinski was in Milwaukee not by accident, but because someone had chosen to loan it to an orchestra so that it could actually be played. And that's a choice that requires a lot of trust. not just in the musician, but in the idea that this valuable thing should be active and public and heard, and not just locked away. The whole arrangement depends on that agreement holding, and then someone, after doing months of research and building the scrapbook and watching Almond's every move, decided to break that trust. Not to possess the violin necessarily for its own beauty and the majesty of it all, but almost certainly not to sell it, since it's practically unsellable. The FBI's best theory is that it was at its core simply a scheme to claim the reward money for returning something that shouldn't have ever been taken in the first place. And there's something rather, it's like a big circle. The reward exists because the violin is priceless. The violin's value is what makes the theft hard to imagine. And then the theft was designed to exploit the very response that its own victim would trigger. Sala had built a whole plan around the idea that people would care deeply about getting this thing back, and they did. But he just didn't plan on what to do after that. One criminologist quoted during the case noted that Stradivarius violins make for essentially impossible items to fence, not because of any moral deterrent, but because of their fame. They have databases, registries, experts who can identify them on site, and a stolen Stradivarius is, in a very real sense, too valuable to sell. The value becomes its own trap. Sala, for all his research, knew the violin's history intimately. He'd been collecting articles about it. He understood what it was. Whether he understood what he was getting himself into is a totally different question. The violin is still in Milwaukee today and still on loan to Frank Almond and is still being played. The anonymous owner continues to make it available to the symphony. In a small way, it feels like a deliberate statement that the right answer to a theft wasn't to retreat, to lock it away, and to stop trusting. The Lipinski has survived 3 centuries, and now a taser in a parking lot didn't change that story. It just added a strange footnote to its history. So that's the scareful story of the stolen Lipinski Stradivarius, which, I don't know, if you guys have ever been to Milwaukee, this just seems like an even more absurd. In the land of cheese and beer heads, that you have this, multi-million-dollar violin. But hey, we've got more things here than people think we do, and more culture here than people maybe think we do. So thanks for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this kind of video, I have a lot more on my channel. I just recently put one up about a very valuable stolen car. But if you're more into true crime, kidnappings, murders, disappearances, I've got some of that too. And I also have wacky cults. The cult of Sarah Lawrence College is a good one. And until next time, stay safe, stay careful, and don't steal unsellable violins, even for the reward money. It's just not going to work out. And really, let me rephrase that. Just don't steal. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.